Good afternoon, everybody. And thank Jim for his very nice introduction, and I'm delighted to be here and to be able to share this time with you. I run a nonprofit membership organization called the Ethics and Compliance Officer Association, as Jim mentioned. And we are a young organization, about 22 years old. I would just say by way of introduction, the ethics profession in business is only 22 years old, and I'll get to that in my remarks. Business ethics as a subject is a young subject. In university life, if you went for ethics 35 years ago, you went to the philosophy class. 35 years ago, Bentley University created the first business ethics course. Today we have many universities that have both undergraduate and graduate degree programs in business ethics. So this is still a young, emerging understanding in the United States and increasingly so around the world. So what I'd like to do today is share with you kind of where we've been, where we are, and where this whole field of business ethics is going to as we look ahead in the world. So this is our agenda as we go through. Let me start off here when bubbles burst. I'm trained as an economist. I spent 40 years in the banking business, largely in and around the Wall Street community. We watch bubbles. When bubbles burst, they expose rot. So the first bubble I'd like to talk about is the technology bubble of the 1990s. And just to put it in perspective, NASDAQ started 1990, the NASDAQ index, at 453. It rose to 5,132 in the first quarter of 2000 before it fell 80% in the summer of 2002. The Dow Jones Industrial Index started the 1990s at 2883, rose to 11,750 in January of 2000, before it fell to 7,800 in the summer of 2002. We never went into a recession. There was a loss of trust in the marketplace. $7 trillion in market capitalization was lost during this period of time. So what were the marquee names? Well, we don't need to spend a whole lot of time. Enron, of course, was the granddaddy of all corporate scandals. October 16th, 2001, Enron announces a $3 billion earnings restatement, and within a period of 5 weeks, it disappeared from the face of the earth. $63 billion in market capitalization wiped out. 20,600 employees of Enron had 62% of their pension assets tied up in Enron stock in their 401k plans, which was going through a change of plan administrators, what they call a blackout period, so they couldn't trade into or out of. People lost 2/3 of their pension assets. This was a horrifying story. Enron was the 7th largest company in the United States, and until that announcement, they never had a down quarter in their financial history. How did this happen? This was stunning. It was unbelievable. Well, investigations opened up immediately in Washington focused on Enron. There was a whole parade of other scandals that came along. Tyco Corporation. Does anybody remember who the poster child for Tyco was? Dennis Kozlowski was the CEO of Tyco. He used $600 million of corporate assets for his own gain. He just kind of gave himself bonuses, didn't go to the board of directors. The most stunning thing at the trial, however, was $2.5 million that he spent on his wife's birthday party. Does anybody remember where the birthday party was held? It was in Sardinia. The theme of the party was a Roman orgy. It was a toga party. They have, at the videotapes at the trial, people walking around with togas. They had a nice statue of David urinating vodka. You can't make this up. This was the picture of executive excess. This was the time that we were in. I mean, it was a horrible time. So we had this parade of all these other scandals going on. One of my favorites on this list is Computer Associates. By the way, they're so ashamed of the scandal that they caught up in, which I'll tell you about in a second, that they changed their name so you wouldn't recognize them. They're called CA today, just to give you a clue. But they had a mantra that said, we must meet analyst expectations. And when they couldn't meet the expectations in any 30-day period, they invented the 35-day month. They took earnings from a future period, brought it to the present. I mean, you can't do that, obviously, that's illegal. So here was a bill about to come before the Congress of the United States in June of 2002 called Sarbanes-Oxley, but the Congress had no interest in this bill. The bill before the Congress in June of 2002 was the Homeland Security Bill. This was post 9/11, speaking of which is the 12th anniversary of 9/11 today. It's important that we remember. John Corzine, who was then senator from New Jersey, later governor, and now fighting for his life in the IMF or the MF Global scandal, was heard to say on June 25th, 2002, it'll take another Enron-sized scandal before we even think about passing Sarbanes-Oxley. Well, the next day the headline read, WorldCom implodes, $173 billion bankruptcy. They had an $11 billion earnings restatement. So Sarbanes-Oxley gets passed. We have all these other things. People around the world said, we always knew you greedy Americans would get us into trouble. Well, it's not a uniquely American experience. Royal Dutch Shell invented $1 trillion in reserves that didn't exist. Volkswagen was taking the heads of the workers' councils around on sex junkets around the world, paid for by the shareholders. And Parmalat was the Enron of Europe. They still can't find $9 billion of cash, which is probably buried somewhere in the Italian Alps. So this is a worldwide phenomenon. My experience out of Wall Street is wherever there is money, there is the potential for corruption. And wherever there is a lot of money, there is the potential for a lot of corruption. So fast forward. We had major settlements. Hospital Corporation of America paid $1.7 billion. AIG paid $1.64 billion. In every one of these cases, there was a deferred prosecution agreement, DPA, with the Department of Justice, which is an agreement of 3, 5, 7 years, which outlines all the things that you will do to mitigate the very risks that got you in trouble to begin with. And in each case, a federal monitor is appointed to represent the Department of Justice until all of those provisions are satisfied. I was brought in by a federal monitor in the early 1990s to Prudential Securities to help clean up a $2 billion scandal at Prudential. Nobody wants a federal monitor to come into your organization. They bring an army of lawyers, an army of accountants. They attend any meeting they want. They have access to every single piece of information, and they can make your life miserable. For me, it was empowering because I was working for a federal monitor, but for people in the organization, it's not. It's a very distressing period of time. So that's what the DOJ was using. Lessons learned, irrational exuberance. Does anybody remember the phrase irrational exuberance? Who said it? It was Alan Greenspan. If anybody ever listened to Alan Greenspan, the former Fed chairman, when he gave sunshine testimony to the Congress, he talked like Casey Stengel. Nobody could understand this guy. You know, he would say things and, you know, the congressmen, the senators would be listening, they couldn't understand him. But in every public testimony, he always tried to send a signal to the markets. So in 1997, he uses a phrase very intentionally, the markets are acting with irrational exuberance. That was a pretty good Greenspan. And he was trying to send a signal to the markets that we were in a bubble. The market was trading at 6,600. So what did the markets do that were in a bubble? They went to 11,750 in January of 2000. They virtually doubled. I mean, he thought we were in a bubble at 6,600. So this was the environment that we were in before all the deck of cards came crashing down. Arrogance, fraud, conflicts of interest, preferential treatment, and failure of all the gatekeepers that were there to represent the interest of share owners and others. It was a terrible period of time. We passed Sarbanes-Oxley. I won't bore you with the provisions of that, the biggest piece of legislation since the Great Depression. We had the Thompson memo. Larry Thompson, now general counsel at PepsiCo, was then Deputy Attorney General of the U.S. He issues the now famous Thompson memo to U.S. attorneys across the country. Here's what you should consider before you prosecute corporations. The seriousness of the offense, the pervasiveness of wrongdoing, a history of similar misconduct, the collateral consequences of conviction. There was a whole list of things. The issue of pervasiveness, however, became a very important phrase because it gets to the issue of culture. What the feds want to know when they come in to investigate, is this a rogue act or is this systemic and part of the culture of the organization? And we're going to talk a lot about culture this afternoon because culture, we have learned in our experience and through research, is by far the single biggest determinant of behavior in every organization in the world. We'll talk more about that in a moment here. The Federal Sentencing Commission, which has been around, which actually gave birth to my organization. So what is the Federal Sentencing Commission? 1984, we pass in Congress the Comprehensive Crime Control Act. They give birth to the Federal Sentencing Commission, which issues to the federal courts the range of crimes that they should give for the same crime, East Coast, West Coast, North, South, male, female, white, or black. That's what the Federal Sentencing Commission does. On November 1st, 1991, they issued Chapter 8 of the Federal Sentencing Guidelines, and it raises two new risks. It pertains to crimes in the workplace. Executives are subject to civil or criminal charges when an employee of yours commits a crime in the workplace. Whether you knew about the crime, whether you participated in the crime is irrelevant. Willful ignorance, willful blindness is not a defense. And in such instances, the corporate threat kicks in, which says you may be subject to mandatory fines up to $290 million. And there's a whole formula, a prescription as to how that will be applied. However, the commission did something very creative. They said if you institute effective ethics and compliance programs, you can reduce, mitigate, or eliminate those risks. 19 of us were meeting at Bentley University at the time. We all had various titles. What do you do? I'm Vice President of Business Conduct. What do you do? I'm Vice President of Ethics. What do you do? I'm Chief Compliance Officer. And then somebody asked the very important question, what do you really do? I don't know, I was just named to the stupid position, you know. So whenever you have 19 people in a room that don't know what they're doing, you form an association. So the Ethics and Compliance Officer Association is born. We grow steady state to 2001, 500 members, and Enron, WorldCom, Sarbanes-Oxley. We double in 3 years to 1,000 members. And now we have 1,500 members in 47 countries across 6 continents. So I think I see a trend forming. We'll talk more about that as we go forward. The bubble burst again. So 9/11 happens. There is economic paralysis throughout the United States. People are traumatized. The Fed lowers interest rates for a prolonged period of time to 1% in order to try and stimulate economic activity. And then my friends at Wall Street lose any sense of underwriting standards. We start making mortgages. And then we come up with something called no documentation loans. I love this. In other words, you don't need any documentation to support your net worth or your income. And they became commonly known in the industry as liar's loans. And then we had ninja loans. No jobs, no income, no assets. Anybody could get a mortgage. We'd take these things across the street to our conflicted friends at Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. We stamp them AAA rated. We package them in units of $1 million. And we sell these bonds across the world. Not even knowing what the risks are in these particular things. We get out to the end of 2007. I'm sitting on the board of 2 national banks. We have bonds that are AAA rated in our portfolio, selling at 99 cents on the dollar, perfectly legitimate. And all of a sudden it drops to 91, 88 cents on the dollar. What's going on here? 67 cents on the dollar. What's going on here? Well, there's some delinquencies, there's some foreclosures taking place, and now the liquidity for these and the appetite for these instruments on a global basis begins to disappear. And so that brings us out into 2008. Bear Stearns in March is handed over to JP Morgan Chase by the Federal Reserve Bank for $2 a share, later renegotiated to $10 a share. And JP Morgan Chase would only take them over if, in fact, the Fed took $29 billion of the most toxic assets out of the deal. An 85-year-old, 4th largest investment bank disappears from the face of the earth in a nanosecond. We get out to July of that year, an insignificant bank, IndyMac Bank. Chuck Schumer, my brilliant senator from New York, comes out of a confidential meeting and tells CNN, IndyMac Bank's in trouble. That night on the 6 o'clock news, there are thousands of depositors lined up for the bank to open the next morning to get their money out. It's a run on the bank. You've seen pictures from the Great Depression. This is a picture from the Great Depression. And then we get out to September. And in September, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the 2 giant mortgage companies, become wards of the state. A week later, Lehman Brothers becomes the largest bankruptcy in human history. $693 billion bankruptcy. The global markets are in absolute chaos and paralysis. Merrill Lynch the next day gets taken over by Bank of America for $29 a share. And AIG, the government steps in and pumps in $186 billion in consideration for almost 80% ownership. This is stunning. Nancy Pelosi, then Speaker of the House, convenes a meeting in her office that night on the 18th. She has the leaders of the Senate and the House from both sides of the aisle, as well as the regulators. Hank Paulson, then Treasury Secretary and the former CEO of Goldman Sachs and one of the brightest people in terms of financial markets worldwide, for 20 minutes, without hyperbole, tells the leaders of our country that if you don't give us wartime powers, the entire global banking system will disappear in a week. People who attended that meeting said the air left the room. Their hair was standing up on the back of it. They've never been so frightened in their life. At the end of Paulson's 20 minutes, she turns to Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed, who is the world's renowned authority on global depressions. She said, Mr. Chairman, what do you think? And he said, if you don't act today, there will be no economy tomorrow. Capitalism almost died 5 years ago. Please make no mistake about it. If you think the Great Depression was bad back in the 30s, you wait for the next one. This one will be a doozy. It'll be far worse than anything you can possibly imagine. And I can assure you there are no more government resources available to bail out the next catastrophe like this. That's how close we came to the edge. This has been a very frightening period of time, and we're still trying to fight our way out of it as we go forward. We had stimulus programs take place and so forth. Warren Buffett has one of the great lines of all time. When the tide goes out, that's when you know who's skinny dipping. I love that. I mean, it's very visual, right? So the tide goes out. What do we get? We got Ponzi schemes. We prosecuted 150 Ponzi schemes in the US. Foreign governments prosecuted another 100. Then we had the unthinkable Bernard Madoff. How do you do this? The guy had a $65 billion Ponzi scheme And he didn't trade a security for 13 years. How do you do this? I mean, this is just stunning. Takes your breath away. He goes to jail. He asks his therapist, he was reported a couple of years ago in New York Magazine, am I a sociopath? No, Bernie, you're just a poor, misunderstood little boy. About a week after the Madoff scandal was disclosed, somebody referred a book to me called The Sociopath Next Door. So I ran to the bookstore, I got it, I'm reading it, 60 pages. Every page describes Bernie Madoff. I can't believe this. This is unbelievable. So I finally stopped. How did this book come out so quickly at this point? And I looked, it was written 10 years before by a world's renowned sociopath. And she writes in her book that 4% of the people in the world are sociopaths. 4% of the people in the world do not have a conscience. Okay? So our organizations are infected with people who do not have a conscience. In fact, we have learned in our experience and through research, there is indeed an ethical bell curve in organizations. 4% on one end, I think on the other end, 5% are Roman Catholics who are afraid of burning in hell for all eternity if they do anything wrong. And then there's everybody else in between, the other 91%. And we're looking to find our way and to find better answers and migrate away from worse answers. And we do that when we work together, because we make better decisions when we operate together. So I'm delighted to see OK Ethics here to be able to raise this dialogue, because we can network with like-minded people, and together we can help solve many of the issues that plague us and confront us, because all the issues are the same, I can assure you. Yeah, we have our local wrinkles in our particular organizations, but they're all the same. We'll talk more about that. Corruption. Satyam Computer was India's great outsourcing giant, the pride of India. 4 months before a disclosure of their scandal, they'd won the Golden Peacock Award in India for being the best governed company in India. 4 years ago, though, Ramalinga Raju went to his board of directors and said, I invented 10,000 fake employees and 400 fake companies to siphon $1 billion out from my brother and I. That was Satyam Computer. Siemens became the poster child for bribery and corruption worldwide. Siemens, which had a relationship with the Nazi regime, as they were required to, probably, at a minimum, during World War II, believed, as many other large German companies believed, that they could not get the business post-World War II unless they went out and paid for it. And so they had decades of systemic bribery and corruption worldwide in order to win business out there. Finally, that got disclosed, and in fact, they settled up with US and German authorities for $1.6 billion. But it could have been $2.7 billion had it not been for their extraordinary cooperation with the government authorities. So Siemens became the poster child for that. Insider trading. Raj Rajaratnam ran a big hedge fund in New York. He was sent to jail for inside trading for 11 and a half years, but he brought down a colleague of his, Rajat Gupta, former CEO of McKinsey & Company, an esteemed globally renowned consulting firm, and Gupta also sat on the board of Goldman Sachs, and he's going to jail for 2.5 years. He's out on appeal right now, but he's already been sentenced. Stephen A. Cohn in Greenwich, Connecticut, he's been accused of, he's already settled a fine for $605 million, but he's now been indicted for willful blindness. 9 of his traders have been indicted. 1 or 2 of them have already been found guilty for inside trading. And they're saying, yeah, but you were the boss. You had a responsibility to oversee this. So they're bringing up on willful blindness of, I mean, he was encouraging, that's what the feds are saying, encouraging this type of behavior. Then we had the only person who has been prosecuted out of the whole Great Recession mess is this 30-year-old kid, Fabrice Touré, who was just found guilty, by the way, of civil charges, so he's going to be barred from the industry and fined for money that he doesn't have. But along the way, his email became very instructive. You do know these are at once the greatest inventions in the world and the most dangerous, because everything you've ever written through any medium of these devices is discoverable. You may have hit the delete button, but I have forensic experts that can find anything that you have possibly written through any one of those social mediums. So this is one that Fabrice Touré writes to his girlfriend, which I think speaks volumes about some of us. He says, the whole building is about to collapse any time now. The only potential survivor, the fabulous Fab, as he calls himself, standing in the middle of all these complex, highly leveraged, exotic trades he created. Anyway, I'm really not feeling too guilty about this, because the real purpose of my job, now he goes into MBA jargon, the real purpose of my job is to make the capital markets more efficient and to ultimately provide the US consumer with more efficient ways to leverage and finance himself. So there is indeed a humble, noble, and ethical reason for my job. And then he writes, it's amazing how good I am at convincing myself. He doesn't believe a word of it. This is a kid experiencing a schizophrenic crack-up. There's two different people here. Yeah, he knows what the words are, but he doesn't live those words. You can't do that. You got to walk the talk, as the expression goes. You know, words without actions are an empty chalice. So to get back what Jim talked about, integrity, from the Latin integer, which means whole or complete. What does it mean to be a whole or complete person? What does it mean to know who you are, what it is that you value and believe, and how you live out those values and beliefs wholly and completely, knowing that we're human. We're going to make mistakes. We've got to learn to forgive, beginning with forgiving ourselves and moving on. But set the bar higher every day. Try and do better every day. I think that's part of the challenge that we have. Let's see, LIBOR and AML. So we got the LIBOR scandal. I won't bore you. Anti-money laundering. But look at these settlements. Union Bank Switzerland, $1.6 billion. HSBC, I worked for them for 15 years. $2 billion to settle because they've been laundering Mexican drug cartel money. This was once the greatest bank in the world. I mean, look at this. This is just stunning what's been happening here. Lost Moral Center, they never had one. You guys are not immune either. 7 days ago, 8 days ago, we got a little local scandal, and of course Sports Illustrated has another one on the cover today as well that you're going to have to deal with. In response, all sorts of legal measures and actions. I'll come back to this in a minute. We have Dodd-Frank bill, which is still being debated. There's 257 provisions, only a third of which have been enacted 2.5 years later, 3 years later. I mean, this is stunning. But one of them in particular is called the Whistleblower Bounty Program. So here's how this works. Anybody who refers an issue to the Securities and Exchange Commission on a publicly traded corporation that results in a settlement of $1 million or more, the SEC is required by law to pay that person between 10 and 30% of the settlement. The SEC used to get 2 to 3 referrals per month. In the first year, they got 3,000 referrals. They can't keep up with it. They have a triage unit. They hired 400 new attorneys to investigate, and they're pushing many of the investigations back into the individual businesses. We'll talk more about that in a minute. SEC, okay, well, I won't bore you with that. Let's make a point. Corruption. I wake up every day and I read a dozen newspapers from around the world. I get these news feeds and so forth, and I have a new speech every day. It's unbelievable. I mean, just everything that goes on here. I look at this thing right somewhere in the middle, ex-Sinopac corporate chairman sentenced to death for bribery. There's a big energy company in China. It's interesting. In China, they don't have Sarbanes-Oxley. They just shoot the bastards. And it really gets everybody's attention. The day after the chairman was executed, every employee came to work on time. It's like, you know, they get with the program. But China takes extreme measures. Obviously, I'm kidding here, but shouldn't take that as lightly. But this one I love. Greek condemned for falsifying data. The Greeks have been telling the EU that they balance their budget every year, when everybody in the world knows the Greeks hate to pay taxes. They all avoid. How can you balance a budget when nobody pays taxes? You can't do that. It's incredible. And also, corruption in Greece is like a sport. You know, they hang around the coffee shop saying, "You'll never guess who I screwed today," you know, and they tell these new stories. But I go about 5 lines down and it says, how the German companies bribed their way to Greek deals. German companies love to pay bribes. Greeks love to take bribes. This is like a marriage made in heaven. Right? This is not a hard deal. You know, you shouldn't be bragging about that. That's easy. Big names also get swept up in issues of and allegations of bribery and corruption. So no one is immune in this world, no matter how strong your system of internal controls are. There are failures in every organization. 22 years ago, the Federal Sentencing Commission gave birth to the ethics profession. And so we have the benefit of perspective to know that change can take place, and this is now happening on a global scale. These measures have happened over the last 3-4 years pertaining to anti-corruption measures, which in 10 to 20 years from now will also make an enormous difference. Will we ever eliminate corruption? Of course not. I'm not naive. But the fact is there are a number of efforts from the UN Convention Against Corruption to the OECD working groups, UK bribery bill. I'll give you some examples. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. We have prosecuted more cases in the United States under FCPA in the last 3 years than we did in the previous 30 collectively. The UK bribery bill goes further than the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I won't bore you with the details of it. It's much more extensive and pervasive. It really has created a much more global scale, if you will, for anti-corruption measures. Nations of the world are holding each other accountable to public peer-to-peer assessments of how well they're doing in enforcing anti-corruption laws and are being critical. We're going through round 1 right now. Round 2 begins in 2015, round 3 in 2018, where Nations are being criticized for not taking appropriate actions of enforcement for anti-corruption measures. I mean, this is very significant. And the G20, which just completed meetings in Moscow, have a continuous agenda being advised by the B20, which I've been privileged to give some input to. So taken together and coinciding with transparency, the world is perfectly transparent. We live in an age of information. There's a whole generation that talks with their thumbs. In an age of information, there are no secrets. There's no place to hide anymore. We have employees talking to each other. We have customers talking to each other. We have suppliers talking to each other. We have regulators across borders who are living with levels of cooperation that are unprecedented. All right? So this world is transforming because of transparency, and we're going to see a lot of change. That's why ethics is in the news so much. Are we more or less ethical today than before? I don't know, but certainly our decisions are much more public, because we can't keep them secret anymore. Everybody knows. Everybody, all you got to do is hit the send button, and some newspaper has the news. Even ordinary people have the power to fight corruption. There are in-house and public helplines. Democratization of media. You don't read Chinese newspapers. Sure, you can read the South China Daily and other Chinese newspapers. They only tell you the good news in China. If you really want to know what the news is in China, there's 160,000 microbloggers who are telling some form of the truth out there. And so, again, dispensing information, and then these little handheld devices, social media and mobile technologies, making a huge difference. We've had some breakthrough programs, won't bore you with that. We can move past that. New risks on the radar. So whistleblowing, we talked about that. Now just a click away. If you want to know what this program is going to look like soon, the False Claims Act, these just happen to be all pharmas, but the False Claims Act pertains to any organization. If you make false claims, you may be subject to penalties from the US government. In every one of these cases, these were brought by whistleblowers. At Pfizer, 6 whistleblowers split $102 million. At Novartis, 2 whistleblowers each got $20 million. At GSK, for the $750 million settle, 1 whistleblower, former director of quality, got $96 million. This is what the whistleblower bounty program is going to do. Are we in favor of this? Not really. We spent 22 years getting our people to produce good helplines, have good investigation protocols to deal with issues internally. But now you can go externally and get paid for it. Let me caution this, though. I've met a number of whistleblowers, really good people, who fell on their sword for something they truly believed in. And in every single case, they've regretted what they've done. The pain, the price, the time it took, the process. And as soon as you tell somebody, and it's all confidential, but you walk down the hallway and you're looking at everybody's face wondering, who knows? It's very painful. It's very difficult. Much better dealing with these things internally in your organization. We have apps, we have hotlines, we have websites, and we have these devices. This is where the world is going. It's a world that's transforming. We have hacking going on. So at what point are we merely doing research, and at what point are we invading somebody else's privacy and space? And this is the problem with technology. Technology lets us do things before we ever think of the ethical consequences of it. And so, it happens in medicine. Stem cell research, life and death. When does it begin? When does it end? There are profound issues where the technology allows us to do things, but then we have to reflect back on this. What are the ethical implications of this? And so business is going through the same thing right now as well. News Corp, of course, was it. Now listen to what the British panel writes about Rupert Murdoch. They say that he is not a fit person. He exhibited willful blindness. This is language from the Federal Sentencing Commission. There was a culture that permeated throughout the organizations, lack of effective corporate governance. I mean, just the language that they're using is language that is now becoming globalized. I was with a former FBI Director Mueller a year ago down in his office. One of my colleagues who was with me says, "What keeps you up late at night?" I expected him to say weapons of mass destruction. He said cyber threats. He said one good threat to the North American power grid, it could shut down the entire global economy. No power in the entire country. No radios, no TVs, no telephones, no nothing, no heat, no light, no nothing. That's okay for 3 hours. How about 3 days? How about 3 weeks? How about 3 months? Think of this thing all of a sudden takes on. So that's what keeps him up late at night, cyber threats. They're also targeting corporate espionage. Again, when are we doing research? When are we actually going in and stealing information that is not available? Bloomberg, we won't worry about. The web's new gold mine, your secrets. My son wanted to get in on the IPO for Facebook. I said, don't go there, Tim. Now it's recovered since. It's gotten back to its IPO price. He said, why not? I said, you're not the customer, Tim. I said, you're the inventory. They're selling your information. So we have the capacity to sell information. At what point, what are the ethical boundaries for that? What is our relationship to our customers? What do they know and acknowledge and understand that we're doing with that? Again, an issue that we need to think about. I don't have an answer, but these are difficult issues that we deal with. This is a little bit old time-wise, but it makes a point. Teachers are restricted to talking to students on social media. My wife is a school teacher, so if you speak to your students, it's through the school's information network. But is it appropriate to talk to your students on Facebook or Twitter or well, how about your employees and who can they talk to and how does information leak out of the organization and do they understand the risks of that? And what policies do you have? So we need to educate and inform people about the potential problems. I have many of my members who are actually doing due diligence before they hire you to find out if you made an ass out of yourself on YouTube, Everybody's out there trying to come up with the craziest gimmick of all time, and so they're out there doing that. I told you we got forensic experts, so here's quotes from emails. Always happy to help. For you, anything. Done for you, big boy. Those are the LIBOR guys doing, trading information on this. This is, they had manipulated the LIBOR lending rate. They're sending these emails back and forth. It could be structured for cows and we would rate it. Guess which Standard & Poor's rating agency that is? That's Standard & Poor's. And then, of course, we come back to the fabulous Fab. He says, I managed to sell a few abacus bonds to widows and orphans. That's called unsuitable investments for widows and orphans. Social media, I love this one. I read a book a year ago, The Flight from Conversation. These little devices we carry around are so powerful, they not only change what we do, but they change who we are. We've become accustomed to being alone together. Have you ever seen two kids standing next to each other? I think they're actually talking to each other through these devices. Are you having a good time? Yeah, I'm having a good time. Yeah, how about you? You having a good time? Send. I don't get it. They fall into the abyss of these little devices, like their whole world is in there. There used to being a tribe of one. Texting, email, and posting lets us present the self we want to be. This means we can edit, and if we wish, we can delete or retouch the voice, the flesh, the face, the body. Not too much, not too little, just right. We create this persona, this estranged persona next to it. This is the person I want you to think I am. I've made myself a little thinner, put a little more color in my cheeks. I've added to my resume and a few things. I made some. I don't want you to see this miserable wretch over here. I want you to meet this person over here. Hey, look, world, this is who I am. This is what I do. Yeah, I don't think we understand the sociological implications of this thing yet. But one thing I do know, Gen Y is different. And we, in business, need to meet Gen Y where they live. And at the same time, we also need to inform them about our expectations about behaviors in organizations. It's going to be a very interesting period of time over the next few years to see how we succeed in that. But it's very important that we do because they are the next leaders. And so we need to bring them into our world and at the same time recognize they're growing up in a world that's very different than the one that I grew up in. I mean, I know I got two kids, 38 and 35. If I call them and leave a voicemail, I might get a call back in 3 weeks. If I text them, it's right away. Yes, Dad. What is it? Yeah, I'll be right there. No problem. It's a totally different world. The 99%ers wake up. This whole Occupy Wall Street movement, we can say it was a bunch of crazy kids, but it occupied in 500 cities around the world. And they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore because they see the fat cats and crony capitalism taking place where the rich go down and get more benefits for themselves at the expense of everybody else. And this is an outcome from both the tech bubble bursting and more recently the Great Recession, is people are mad. They're still mad. We still have 7.5% unemployment. When the Great Recession occurred, 20 million people lost their jobs worldwide. $22 trillion in global equity value was wiped out. And we haven't fully recovered by a long shot. So we need to be mindful that something got us into trouble. And the epicenter was, make no mistake, Wall Street. Make no mistake about it. But it became something that we all kind of acceded to. Profound loss of trust. Jim talked about trust being enormous. Good friend of mine, David Greenberg, writes, trust is relational, not transactional. So it's not how many deals I did for you that you trust me. You trust me because I have your best interest in mind. You trust me because I have your best interest in mind. We've got to understand it's about people. Everything we do in the world is done with, by, for, and through people. We need, in a world of high tech, we need to get back to high touch. We need to get reconnected to people in a meaningful way. You just can't have these electronic relationships with people forever. That's why coming together like this and growing like this is such a credit to Shannon and her colleagues and all of the people who have been the pioneers of this, and all of you for taking the time because you wanted to be here, because you wanted to be connected. And there can't be anything more important, because together there's nothing that we can't accomplish in the Oklahoma region, and apart there's nothing that we can. And that's been my experience through my lifetime as we go through this. How do my members deal with trust? Culture. They deal with, so what is trust? Trust is a sacred and emotional relationship between people. It's built in small steps over a long period of time, but all it takes is a single betrayal to have that trust shattered. And if anybody in this room has ever experienced a shattered trust, you'll know what that feels like. It's the emptiest feeling in the world. You can't sleep at night. You wake up in the morning and there's a hole in your stomach. It's just, and it leads to depression. It's terrible. So how do you build trust? My members build it through culture. System of shared values passed from one generation to another. The General Accounting Office had a pretty decent definition. The underlying assumptions, beliefs, attitudes, and expectations shared by an organization. But what we've learned, both through research and experience, is culture is the way things really get done around here. It is by far the most powerful influence on corporate behavior in every organization around the world. And so my members are focusing a lot on culture. What is it? It's collective, it's emotional, it's historic, it's symbolic. It's told through legendary stories in organizations. It's definitely contradictory, it's paradoxical, but everybody sees what's recognized and rewarded in organizational life. If you want to know what culture looks like, it's your boss. For people in the C-suite, it's the CEO. For mid-level people, it's your mid-level manager. And for people on the plant floor, it's the plant supervisor. If you want to know what culture sounds like, it's the stories that we tell around the water cooler, the legendary stories of how people did something that represented a value in a particular organization. That's how you capture stories. You got great organizations that know how to produce the kind of cultures that are winning cultures. And they do, and they focus on it. And the benefits of it we'll talk about in just a second. There is a dark side to culture, make no mistake. You go through these headlines and they're in the newspaper every day. U.S. targets an insider culture. Ex-Goldman director is indicted. News Corp attorney testifying in England says there was a noted hacking culture in 2008. Culture of complacency at BP about safety issues. Culture kills. Massey Energy, one of their executives was just found guilty and goes to jail in his trial yesterday. Goldman Sachs, Senator Carl Levin says a culture of recklessness and greed. There is a dark side to culture. It tells people what's recognized and rewarded. And so we need to pay attention. My members go out and do culture assessments, employee surveys, focus groups, to baseline what their culture is. And you'll find 4 or 5 or 6 positive behaviors you want to reinforce, and you'll find 3 or 4 that are negative behaviors, and they're the hardest to get rid of. They're like dandelions. If you step on them, they grow right back. You got to pull them out by the roots. You got to find the people who are doing it and walk them to the door publicly, so everybody knows that these behaviors will not be tolerated in this organization. It's the only way to deal with it. And even then, it still takes time to shift cultural elements around. So it's a very difficult thing. Culture trumps compliance. Enron was in substantial compliance with the law. Vincent and Elkins, noted Houston law firm, signed off on compliance at Enron. If you walked into Enron's garage, drove into it, every steel girder had one of their values on it. Every executive coffee mug had their values on it. If you bought shares of stock of Enron, their values were right at the top. But their culture was completely out of control. Anything goes. That was the kind of culture. The power of culture cannot be underestimated. Good friend of mine, Paula Reynolds, who was CEO of 3 major energy companies in the US, now sits on the board of 4. And the fight between culture and compliance, culture will always win. It's that simple. In fact, we've learned that mere compliance programs in organizations by the 2nd year begin to become check-the-box programs. The regulators in Washington now understand that compliance without ethics is inadequate. Compliance without it. As of 2004, the Federal Sentencing Commission guidelines were amended that in addition to law compliance, you must have ethics, a strong ethics program, and a corporate culture that embraces them. We now understand that compliance by itself, you can't write enough laws to tell everybody what to do at all times in the world. Strong cultures self-regulate. We understand that. We shape culture, and culture shapes us. Our behaviors become the culture, and that returns to shape who we are. To be a great company, says Jeff Immelt, you must be a good company. It reminds me of de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville once wrote in Democracy in America in 1831, America is great because America is good. But if America ever ceases not to be good, America will cease not to be great. And sometimes I worry about America. Sometimes I worry, but I'm encouraged today because I see all of you here, which is terrific. This is a great one. Ted Koppel, newsman a few years ago, giving the commencement address, I believe at Stanford University, and he writes, "We will not change what's wrong with culture through legislation or by choosing up sides or party affiliations. We will change it by small acts of courage and kindness, and by recognize that each of us has his or her own obligation to set a proper example. Aspire to decency," he tells the students. "Practice civility towards one another. Admire and emulate ethical behavior wherever you find it. There is no mystery here. You know what to do. Now go out and do it." It is at some level that simple. I realize I'm perhaps oversimplifying it, but he's imploring. We know what to do. We know what's right in the world. Raise your ethical consciousness and take a stand. And it happens on an individual basis. Milton Friedman wrote a piece in 1970 saying the social responsibility of business is to maximize profits. And a lot of us have had an argument with this. Peter Drucker said free enterprise cannot be justified as just being good for business. It must be justified as being good for society. So what we're seeing more and more is a change, a shift in the way corporations are approaching their work in the world. Capitalism, I believe, is at the beginning stages of going through an extreme makeover. That they are trying to begin to build socially responsible businesses where all stakeholders are treated the same and no stakeholder is traded off against another. That is, you don't give the investor first preference at the expense of all other stakeholders. That you take your values and you apply them to all stakeholders equally and the same. I see a flight to integrity in the markets. Goldman Sachs stock is still down $65 billion from its peak. BP stock is still down $100 billion from its peak. Toyota stock is still down $20 billion from its peak when the brakes didn't work. I can tell you what your reputation is worth. It's the value of your organization. All right, and we see that if there's an issue of fraud or malfeasance in a public corporation, the stock goes down immediately. It's only a question of how much. So there is clearly a flight to integrity out there. Whole Foods, just to give you a few positive examples, they have a declaration of interdependence. This is a mission-driven company, all right? And they understand that we live in an interdependent world, and they go on to cite this thing, and I won't read it to you, but they believe in a whole foods, whole people, and a whole planet approach to how they conduct themselves. Wegmans, a great supermarket chain, says good people working towards a common goal can accomplish anything they set out to do. They pay above average wages, affordable health care. They have a 401k match plus a pension plan, which is unheard of almost across America these days, and they give scholarships to employees and their kids. And if we take care of our employees, they take care of our customers, is what the owner of Wegmans says. Their operating margins are double that of big stores, and their sales are 50% higher per square foot. I mean, so here they are overpaying their people, but the turnover is negligible. I mean, all the other benefits that are derived from it are extraordinary. Patagonia, their tagline is living the examined life. It was Socrates who said the life unexamined is not worth living. Patagonia has taken it the other way. They are environmentally conscious. They will engage suppliers who are committed to the same environmental standards they are, even if those suppliers are higher cost suppliers out there, and they develop lifetime relationships with them. This is what socially responsible organizations do. They take their values and they make them come alive in relationship to all of their various stakeholders as they go forward. Honda, Harley-Davidson, I won't read these to you, but they have it. Porter and Kramer out of Harvard say it's got to be strategic. It's got to be at the center of the organization. It's got to be at the center of who you are and how you conduct your business. But they have a great quote in here. They say they believe that most businesses are tactical and reactive in their social responsibilities because they focused on the tension between business and society rather than the interdependence. We need to see ourselves as interdependent around this world in our relationships with all of our stakeholders. Again, Drucker says it's got to be built into strategy rather than just merely a statement of good intentions. We have too many companies that have these wonderful, glossy statements, but they don't translate into the operations of the organization as you go forward. What are the benefits of it? I won't read it to you, but they're obvious and they're clear and they're real. That if you conduct yourself in a positive way through making your values come alive, in the way you conduct your business with all of your stakeholders, the benefits are profound, and generally you will outperform your competitors in the industry as you go forward. Companies without a soul face a troubling future. I believe so. I think we've got to get back to that. I used to teach economics and finance. I had studied Greek at some point in my life, and I came across the word oikonomia, economics. That's where we get it from, steward of the manor. We are the stewards of the manor. We are the stewards of the earth. If not us, who? The plants, the animals, the insects, the fish? If not us, who? Who's going to choose the future for ourselves, our kids, and our grandkids? If not you, who? If not now, when? It has to happen here and now. This is who we are. Here you are, promoting integrity at work, the Oklahoma Business Ethics Consortium. I believe it's a defining moment. My days are basically done. I've been in business 100 years. I'm at the tail end of whatever I can contribute to this great world, but we've got to make the world ready for the next generation. I went over today to the Murrah Museum and took a tour with Bob, and was deeply moved by the experience there that you all experienced here in 1995. And obviously I have something in common with that experience because today is the 12th anniversary of 9/11. And I experienced 9/11 up close and personal. My office was 2 blocks south. I was in a meeting with my office overlooking New York Harbor and the Hudson River when I saw the second plane fly across the Hudson and slam into the South Tower. And obviously it was a very dark experience. We evacuated the building. I realized outside we had the worst seat in the house as people were jumping out of the windows of the World Trade Center. So I ordered my employees to go back upstairs to call their families, to tell them that we would send people home in teams at 10:30 in the morning, even though I knew the telephones weren't working. But I wanted to get them out of the view of what they were seeing and experiencing firsthand that day. I brought my management team up to the boardroom to talk about emergency preparedness. People were in a state of shock. Within 3 minutes, I heard the screams outside. As I looked out the window, I saw this mushroom cloud coming towards us, not knowing what it was. I assumed it was a nuclear suitcase. It was the building imploding, the first building that fell. And we then went into darkness for the next 3 hours. We were downwind, so you could not see out the doors, the windows. The building manager made an announcement immediately and said everybody should evacuate the building. And luckily enough, I had the head of security standing next to me. And I'm thinking, you can't go outside. You can't even see outside. So I told Dave, order the guards downstairs. Don't let the people leave. And if you can see anybody, take them in for safe harbor. So now I have my next problem. I got 2,000 employees trying to get into a lobby that fits 200 people with panic setting in. Somebody whispered in my ear and said that we have air conditioning downstairs in the vault. So I asked everybody as calmly and as loudly as I could to go downstairs. And for the next several hours, 1,500 people made it into the vault. Another 500 of us stood outside waiting for news. And slowly we heard about the Pentagon. We heard about Shanksville. We heard rumors of other planes in the air. I kept trying to dial out and couldn't reach anybody but locally. And then finally at about 12 noon, I dialed my daughter down in the Washington, D.C. area. And she said, "Oh, Dad, are you okay?" I got to her. I said, "Yes, I'm okay. Call your mother, call your brother. Tell them I don't know when I'll get home." But she said, "How about your brother?" I said, "I assume he's dead. He was killed in the North Tower, along with 2 friends of mine." I said, "Where's your husband?" She said, "He's at the Pentagon." Thankfully, he walked in while we were on the phone. As the day proceeded, I commandeered a bank car, took a dozen people north up into the Connecticut region. We were in gridlock for most of the trip coming out of Manhattan as the emergency vehicles came down. And what was interesting was at one point, stuck in traffic, strangers came over with wet towels and without even asking, just passed them into the car so we could wipe the debris and dust off us. At another corner, 2 strangers came in with a dozen bottles of water, just handed them in, no comment. At yet another corner, I watched a shoe store owner give away his entire stock of flats and sneakers to women who would have to walk many miles home because there was no transportation operating in Lower Manhattan. And I will tell you, in the days and weeks that followed, I saw some things that I have never experienced in my life before. Out of the darkness of that experience, which I know you understand here in Oklahoma City, I saw the greatest outpouring of friends and strangers alike, helping each other in community with one another. And in some speeches I gave in the days and weeks and months that followed, I said, my biggest fear is that someday we will go back to business as usual. And we did. We did. We need to remember. We need to remember 9/02, and we need to remember 9/11. Together, we can make this a better community and a better society. Thank you for letting me share this time with you.